Thank you, Kevin. Can you hear me? Is everything good? Awesome. Cool. So we'll get started. Probably everybody's coming off of lunch. I want to make sure that I get through it before I've put everybody to sleep with my mellifluous monotone. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks for joining in on our discussion today, how design can enhance every step in your value chain. As Kevin said, my name is Derek Fricano. I'm a senior designer at OST, which if you don't know, we're a consultancy in Grand Rapids. And much of my work is in helping companies integrate human-centered design practices into their operational models. I've worked in design by now in some form for around 20 years, starting way back in print, doing ad layouts and things like that before moving through various digitally focused roles and environments, from med tech startups to Fortune 500 financial services and fintech companies. I've been working with our configuration services team at OST this year a lot, which is part of how I ended up here today. And the work that they do and the work that I've learned that most of the people listening in on this call today are doing, like designing catalog extensions, configuring huge spaces as a CET designer, you all deliver a ton of value to your customers. And I've got to level with you. Coming into today, I kind of feel like a bit of an imposter. Like, look at what this talk is promising, right? I pulled up the bullet points from the promotion. Like, I'm supposed to give all of this information to you. And when you consider what most people think about when they think about or when they hear that you're a designer, you're the fonts and colors and buttons person that creates UIs and kind of sprinkles this magical dust onto the engineered products to make them look designed. How is that value? Like, what difference does that make? How does that deliver on anything that the conference guide said that design can do for you? So, spoiler alert, today is not going to be a talk about the season's hottest sans serif fonts or why skeuomorphism and neumorphism are really more alike than not. And we won't necessarily talk about things that are like very CET specific, because you're going to get a lot of that from John Vinsko and Kyle Jansen later on today. But what we are going to talk about is human-centered design, what it is, a bit of a definition of it, and how you can use it, even if only a little bit of it at any given time, to de-risk the work that you're undertaking for your customers. Because to me, I believe in the value of human-centered design work that comes before we all get busy building things. And I want you to discover the ways that you can use it to make a difference in how you work so that you're reducing risk and delivering on those promises that were laid out in the conference guide. So by the end of this talk, you'll learn how design informs a journey by helping you to understand better who is actually taking the journey and what their steps are. You'll learn how design helps to improve a journey by demonstrating where it succeeds, where that journey succeeds, and where it might lack. And you'll learn how design helps to increase the value of a journey by pinpointing when, where, and exactly how you can best deliver value throughout that journey. My goal is to give you some background on human-centered design and soak up some ideas for how you can add it to your repertoire and skill set. So with that in mind, let's get started by talking about exactly what is human-centered design. Lisa Helminiak is one of the principals at OST, and she actually just released a podcast that spoke in pretty great depth about human-centered design and the value that it brings beyond just those visual design and magical dust concerns that I was all tied up about a few slides ago. I'd encourage you to go and check it out at ostusa.com/podcast. We've got a bunch of really good content there, in addition to design and development sorts of topics. But Lisa describes in this podcast how design is usually understood and characterized by visual design. And it's common because that's how most people experience design. It's through the things that you see, kind of popularized by design's role and visual role in marketing and, creating things that wow you. But design encompasses so many other disciplines. Like if you look at architecture or urban planning, service design, or the reason why most of us are here today, software design. The visual component is only one of a bunch of very critical concerns in that sort of design work. You could argue that for software, design has a lot more to do with supporting user needs and making things work as they were expected, to the extent that if we don't succeed in those two things, it doesn't matter how it looks or how much wow there is, because people are just going to leave what you've got behind. But let's jump up to that quote at the top of the screen for a second. Design is the desirability lens on technology. Lisa makes that point that, design is that desirability lens, while business and technology bring the lenses of viability and feasibility. And the story that this diagram is kind of telling is about the outcomes that occur when there's either like a balance between these three lenses, but it also points out what can happen if those lenses are imbalanced. The companies that I've worked with in the past or consult with presently usually are able to bring the lenses of business and technology. They've got great visibility into the challenges of their markets, the problems that they want to solve to increase their market share. And they're also usually flush with talented and inventive developers and engineers, but we often see that they aren't able to give voice specifically to the needs and the concerns of the people that they're building for. They may build an app that has high viability and exceptional build quality, but it might be hard to use, or it may not do exactly the right things on behalf of the user. And again, what we've learned is that people don't use products that are hard to use or that don't specifically solve the problems or the jobs they've hired them to do. So that's where human-centered design comes in. Human-centered design helps you to build that lens into what's desirable for your users. Simply stated, it solves problems by considering the human perspective and the needs in every step across your process. This is a snapshot of the human-centered design process for OST. And basically simplified, it's just that we put people at the center of every part of what we research, what we build, and what we measure. Even though this process only has 3 steps, given all the other stuff I've just talked at you, it probably still feels like a lot to take in. So for the purpose of this discussion today, we're going to focus on 2 parts of this. We're going to focus on the learning and the building. So we'll narrow our focus and we'll start small, and we'll start by learning about how we learn. Collecting insights. We'll think about how you are going to gather all the hows and whys that drive your human-centered design practice. The first insight you can have for free, and it's universal. And if you're not basing what you're working on this insight, then I hope that this is the one thing that you take away. The biggest mistake that we can make in creating things for other people is that we usually forget that we aren't the person that's going to end up using that thing. We might think we are, because we speak on their behalf in discussions or meetings because we've built so many things on their behalf, or because we've looked at a lot of analytics for them, or just because we've been asked to posit a lot of opinions on their behalf. But if we really look at ourselves, the roles that we undertake, it's easy to see that our roles aren't the same as that of the user, or in the case of this diagram, the job performer. We might be the buyer who buys things on their behalf. We may be the technician that builds or repairs things that they use. We may be that person's manager. We might be that designer hanging off way in the corner who's sprinkling dust on the things that they use. But it's important to really take it to your core that we are not the person that is going to end up using what we build to solve the problems. In order to get closer to that, in order to design meaningful experiences for others, we have to understand them. And most importantly, we've got to build up some empathy with them. Getting closer to that person should be the #1 goal of gathering your insights. In order to get that, you've got to get a sense of the people that you're serving. But how do you do that, right? It's not just that you can grab a bottle of empathy and take a drink. How do you build the empathy? How do you learn to see past your own experiences and your biases and get into somebody else's head? The answer there is user-centered research. User research helps us to make sure that we're establishing that foundation based on something more than just our own assumptions and biases. And the only way that we're going to get really effective user research is by getting close to your users. It's a little difficult these days, it's social distancing, it provides its own set of challenges, but sharing it, figuring out ways to share your users' space, to listen to them as they walk you through the things that they face, to use their language, to get a sense of exactly what they're feeling in the moments that they feel them, it goes a very, very long way to building up that empathy. And it seems like a lot of work too. you've already got a job that you're excellent at, and it's likely that that job is not user experience researcher. But what I want to convey and what we're going to walk through next are ways that we can make this a little bit easier to get started on than you might initially think. One of the ways, before we even get into some other research techniques, is by looking for groups within your companies that may already have access to your users. So I'm thinking things like if you've got a dedicated research group, maybe you've got some sort of insights group, a customer service group, a marketing department. There might be analytics, there might be call logs or help logs that you can start to at least get a sense of what people are up against. And that information is a great way to establish some sort of a base of understanding for your users. But whether you have some research or none at all, there's always the opportunity for you to get more. And there are a lot of different ways that you can accomplish it. There are simple methods that really don't take a whole lot of preparation, like sending out emails with questions, web surveys, customer feedback forms, or phone calls even. We've done a lot of just telephone interviews over the course of the quarantine. When we all get back to a place where we can share spaces, those research methods might look a little bit more complicated or more complex, but they might yield some deeper or more valuable insights, like getting into a room with your users and watching them do work through field studies, or conducting focus groups, or conducting workshops. Really, you can pick any method as long as it fits your requirements and fits your capabilities. And it's okay to start small, because again, some research is better than none at all. Some insights, some means to build up that empathy is better than not having anything. The most important thing is that you're establishing some goals for your research, and that you are focusing your research to inform those goals. So think about the questions that you have, whether it's about the thing that you're building, the problem you're trying to solve, or the people that you're solving it for. What don't you understand about them already? What places can you fill in with more understanding? If you need some help, you can formulate your research goals by filling out problem statements. If you've never done it before, it's actually kind of fun. Like you can see, these are a couple of examples that I built out with our CET class, where basically it's just like filling in a Mad Lib, which is always one of my favorite things to do because I was a language arts nerd. Like, you start out just by going straight from the top and filling in, instead of nouns and verbs and adjectives, you're filling out who your target audience is, what their problems are, what solutions you think they may need, and how to measure the results. And if you look at these, if you can see them on your screen, you can see that down at the bottom, like I've got brackets and questions. It's totally cool to not have all of the questions answered in your problem statement. In fact, that gives you the basis of some of your research goals, so that now as you go through and conduct that research, we could start asking ourselves, is this thing that they're telling me something that I can measure the eventual success of the things that we have built? So there you go. You've made it through all of your research. You've charted out your different series of phone calls or workshops, and you've got this big pile of stuff. Now, what do you even do with it? You've already gotten through the observing, and that's great because it gives you the empathy and the insight. But you've got a whole team that you're working with. You got to get that stuff out to them somehow. The tools that you can use, documenting that user behavior, will help to guide your team, but it also helps to kind of hold you responsible over the course of what you're building. I've found that delivering those insights using some kind of lightweight documentation, it doesn't have to be anything really big or complicated, really helps to get the team to embrace your goals, to really get that user lens into the middle of the conversations. It really helps to carry that through the course of those conversations. So in the next few slides, we're going to talk about some lightweight, some easy ways that we can start thinking about how to document those insights. And I tried to come up with like some, kind of dad joke friendly way to encapsulate all of those things. But I've got to give way more credit to Maria, who did the illustrations for this, than my actual idea. But that being said, we're going to talk about ways that we can document the people, the pathways, and then the priority of the events that they see as important. And that'll be how we talk about what you do with those insights that you've gathered. So let's jump in on the humans part of your human-centered research. So you've done your phone calls, you've had some sort of primary contact with your users, hopefully, surveys, emails, something. So once you've taken the time to read and interpret everything that you've collected from them, you'll probably start to see trends emerge about those users, like what their jobs require, their experience level, how they use a product, their comfort level with technology, what happens when they feel glad or frustrated or successful. And all of that information is super critical to, again, developing that understanding and building up that empathy for those people that are going to use your products. One of the most common tools to demonstrate those user traits back to your teams and just to kind of create as a tool to guide yourself through the rest of the process is personas. A persona is just a representation of a character and their associated traits. It might be an actual person, or I've often used these things as like basically like a compilation of many people that we've then kind of abstracted and anonymized. But it's valuable in a couple of different ways. It encapsulates the large bodies of user research that you've done and the number of insights that you've started to accrue into a nicely consumable summary, right? You think about what those important highlights are for your people as it relates to your project. And this is how you can start to surface that stuff and carry it along with you over the course of your project lifespan. The second way that personas can be helpful is let's say that you do find yourself in a position where you don't have a ton of research. You were able to conduct it with maybe a couple of people. That was all the time or the resources that you had. You can fill in those personas with assumptions of some of those data points. And you can then validate that information with your team, right? Collectively, you can build up this persona, even if it's based on some amount of user information, but then you can kind of craft a set of assumptions and use this document as your kind of, permission slip, your assumptions guide, and then validate it over the course of the rest of the work that you're doing and the rest of the research that you may be conducting. So again, it's just important to have that tool to rally around and to provide some direction. And they don't have to be big and fancy. These are example personas that we made with the configuration services team as I learned all about what CET designers do. And you can see they're not particularly highly embellished. They capture key points like motivations, goals, and demographics and psychographics. And then you can see in the middle there, they've got a nice little quick memorable story that you can rally around. All of that detail just provides the team a way to check your design decisions against something other than business requirements or technical constraints. Again, it's how do we surface that empathy? How do we surface that understanding of the people that are actually going to put this to work day after day? And I'll let John and Kyle correct me if I misrepresent any parts of this, but the feedback that we got on the personas and using them is that they really resonated with the team because there's a feeling that, on behalf of a lot of clients, sometimes there's just a real rush to get things done, right? Like we know that we have to use CET, but sometimes we don't really think about the way that we can make the work better or more desirable or easier for those designers. So once we had these tools as a part of the workflow, they found them valuable because it helped them to put themselves in the shoes of others, right? That's kind of what empathy is all about. So that's good to hear. And they found that they could make more intentional decisions when plotting how to build and structure extensions once they knew more about the motivations of the people that were going to end up using them. So that's what they found. I'm going to see how successful we are. I'm going to check and see how many people we've got. Well, 15-ish, I think we may be able to pull this off. So I've got a little activity. Let's organize a series of human-centered research insights into a quick persona together. I want to give everybody the chance to kind of flex your brains and, again, not listen to me do all of the talking and see how you might build a quick persona of your own. And I'm going to jump over to my other screen. Kevin, if you wouldn't mind unmuting folks, we'll see We'll see if we can handle the responsibility collectively. So while we're getting that set up, what I've got here is our blank persona template, and we've got a bunch of post-it notes off to the side that are insights. So what I want to ask for people to do is we'll just kind of start here, and I want you to think, right? We've got our insights, and we've got categories around motivations, goals, pains, demographics, and psychographics, and think about where these things might land in that persona template as we try to flesh out exactly who Oliver External Designer is. So we can start with something like visual thinker. That would probably land in demographics, but who wants to volunteer? Where should we put enjoys being known as the expert?
So I gave everyone the ability to talk, but if you want to speak up, just go ahead and unmute yourself, and we should be good.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, totally.
Sweet. That seems like a motivation to me.
Motivation, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is too, what I want to say is that like there may be a couple of categories that these things could be useful insights across. So there's no one specific right answer. So 45 years old, where does that feel like it should land?
Demographics?
Yeah, absolutely. Non-technical. Pains. Oh, was that Vansel? Yeah, I'm starting to feel those pains. So our user is non-technical. Where would we put that? Is that a motivation, a goal, a pain, demographic, psychographic? Psychographics, by the way, is just like, it's more of the psychology of your user, right? It's things that they think or feel.
Psychographics.
Yeah, because I mean, honestly, with this, that could be the way that they are just thinking about themselves. I think you'd probably be hard pressed to find a CET designer who isn't at least a little bit technical, right? 15 years furniture experience.
Demographics.
Absolutely. Pressure to get work done.
Pains.
100%. Prone to frustration.
Again,
Psychographics, totally. Reduced time on task.
Goals.
Yeah, that feels like a good KPI. Liberal arts background. Demographics. Emotionally shuts down if their tools fail.
Psychographics.
Yeah, could be a pain too. So like I said, don't feel like there's only one slot for these to go into. Established extension user. They've got some experience.
Demographics.
Accuracy.
Goals.
Higher job quality.
Goals.
Yeah. High tolerance for complexity.
Go
Psychographics?
without that one.
Yeah, I think we could probably go psychographics, and just wants things to just work.
Pains.
And that's interesting that you would slot that there. That tells a much different story than if that might have gone into a different place, because when you read it that way, the story that you tell about Oliver might change a little bit, right? Like he might go from somebody that, just wants to maintain the status quo to the pain that he feels is he just wants things to work. It seems to intone that things aren't currently working for them. So now you have this tool, this description that you can carry along with you. And again, like it seems really lightweight. It seems really, like Like, what could the value of this possibly be? But now, when you find yourselves in a position to make decisions about how to organize things or what stuff to trim and what stuff to not include, you'll have this lens, this human-centered framework of, well, are the things that we're trying to cut, or the things that we're trying to add, the things that we're trying to do they align with the information that we've got about Oliver external designer? Are we making this thing too complicated for them, for somebody that's non-technical? Are we making it too literal for a visual thinker? Are we helping Oliver to accomplish their goals of reducing time on task or accuracy or delivering higher quality jobs? And it seems very light, but it's tools like this that can really start to promote this stuff to the forefront of your discussions and your prioritizations. So thank you for humoring me with that one. Now back to the narrative. Whoops, that's not the one that I wanted to do. Where did it go? There it is. All right, sorry. I clearly have some of Oliver's technical limitations. All right, so we talked about Oliver, we talked about people. The thing is in your research, as you're learning about your people, you're probably also moving beyond just, their character and their psychology. You're probably also learning about how they move through the experiences that bring them into contact with your products and services. You'll find that modeling those pathways or their journeys provides another really valuable tool for you to help build empathy with them and to help align your teammates around those users. So it's possible that what you learned about how your product fits into a user's life is expressed more widely than just like the mechanical button pushing interactions. You might have learned about what motivates them to buy a new product, what steps they went through when they chose or bought it, or even what it looked like after they had finished using your product. In the case of an extension designer, I've learned that it might be helpful to know all of the phases that a CET designer moves through around the experience of creating a layout or plan, and then how those phases help them to decide which extension they should actually use in the first place. Having a sense of those journeys is the reason why using journey maps like this is very valuable. It's a simple diagram split across phases that then also kind of highlights what the most important touch points are across those phases. It gets really valuable when you start to also talk about how their emotions might map onto that. Like, there might be specific points that are really good, but you might see that there are also points that provide a ton of frustration. Not only does that open up a lot of opportunities for you in creating a future state, but it also can start to inform your KPIs. This was the journey map that we built in our configuration services class so that I could, again, learn a little bit more about the journey of a CET designer. And while I learned a lot about your work, our extension designers started to think about how this kind of thing could help them to design better extensions. Like, from their perspective, they're often asked to design an extension to work like some other competitors, right? And that's a problematic point of view because their brand experiences are usually really different from others. And what we found is that by mapping and understanding those user paths, our configuration services folks said that it challenged their assumptions about whether the way that other people are doing it is actually the right way for all of our other customers to do the work. And it gave us the opportunity to engage those customers in a different kind of discussion so that we were focused more on bringing the right product into being for them as opposed to just mimicking another experience. There are a lot of other types of maps that you can use. This is an example of a job map, which is based on like the jobs to be done research framework. The reason why I wanted to show it is because it strips away a lot of like the emotional content and really focuses very specifically on exactly what the jobs are that somebody is trying to accomplish, whether or not they use the tools that you're putting out there for them to use. And this is really good. It provides really stable bedrock for your company and for your teams to use as guidance in things like innovation, because while the jobs might stay very, very stable, the technology is always changing and the approaches to getting through those jobs might change over time. Another example of a really good map is these context scenarios. And this is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from the job maps, where these really ratchet up the focus on the experience around your touch points. It's another really great way to layer in the human experience and build that empathy for parts of a process that are granted. This was an example that we built for a client that I really, really liked, because it actually goes as far as smashing this context scenario right on top of the journey map itself. So you really start to see from the perspective of this storytelling and this discussion in very human terms of where problems or where awesome successes might take place. Again, you really start to build a sense of those people that are using your product. You really build that empathy while you're also building the awareness of what they do. Finally, user flows can be particularly effective if you're already in the space where you have a very granular understanding of how somebody might move through, let's say, like an existing product experience. These user flows can be really helpful in shedding light on redundancies or pain points, or particular places where streamlining has really benefited the design of a particular workflow. And again, they don't necessarily have to be pretty to be effective. This was an example of the user journey or the user flow that we built in our configuration services class. And while it gave me a ton of understanding of the individual points of the software experience, it didn't take us very long to build. So that brings us to our second activity. So in this activity, I've already built out, and basically kind of what I want to do is I want to use this as an opportunity to validate my existing research around the CET designer experience, where we're going to walk through the designer's workflow. And we're going to do two things. First of all, I want to give everybody the opportunity to tell me if we've missed any steps in that journey, or if any of the steps that I've put out there might not actually be realistic. But then we're also going to try a light bout of empathy mapping, where for every one of the steps in that journey, I want you to tell me just, based on your experience, whether it's kind of good as it is, whether it's something that makes you extremely happy, or if it's some place where you experience a great deal of pain or complication. So we'll jump back over to my Miro board and kind of have a look. So again, it's not particularly pretty, but the insights that we'll derive from this will be particularly valuable. So Kevin, if you could help people off of mute again, we'll walk through this. And if
everybody
people
should be good.
Cool.
Same, I didn't remove them back to untalk.
Oh,
so
perfect.
Each individual should be able to unmute themselves here to participate.
Everybody was just so kind. I thought for sure there must have been like some software intervention there. Not to say anything at all about our panelists, our participants. This has been really wonderful. Thank you for the time. And by the way, if at any point you're not able to see the text on the sticky notes, please give me a shout and I'll zoom in a little bit. But I was trying to find the right balance between, like being able to see the whole thing and being able to read any particular step. So I'll just kind of walk through the steps. We've got that an order is assigned, that you evaluate the order details, that you pick a section, that you visualize the configuration of the space, you pick your extension, you place the products in a scene. There is opportunity for peer review. You might demo for the customer, place the order. The order is audited, the order is fulfilled, and then installation instructions are passed to installers. So we kind of talked about where the initial awareness begins and kind of where it ends from the perspective of the CET designer, right? Like where you can kind of settle out and think to yourself, okay, I can probably move this to like the done file for right now unless something happens. So I know I walked through those pretty quickly. Are there any parts that I might have overlooked there, or is there language that might be out of alignment there? Or are we looking good? Does this seem like a pretty complete map?
Typically, we use quote before order. So we would say quote is assigned, and then an order would be like when someone has put the order, like given us a PO.
So would you say that this quote is assigned would replace the order step, or is it one that happens before the order is assigned? Is it more a question around the language that's being used?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Thank you. So I can, if I do this and I then do that, does that still represent the right kind of journey?
Yes.
Perfect.
And then
Thank you.
like your evaluate order details would turn to like evaluate quote details.
Awesome. The words and the language that in all of this you'll find is extremely important. So details like this are really to be encouraged as you are talking to and working through any particular session with your users. You want to make sure that you're expressing the insights back using language that it aligns to their mental models. So this is super helpful. Cool. So let's start with when the quote is assigned. How does everybody generally feel about that? Is that kind of a baseline, like, yep, I get my work, that's good? Is there something about it that really elevates it to like, this is one of my favorite parts of the process? Or is it kind of one that lives down in the, you know, like there are pain points associated with this that I'd like to solve? Just bark it out.
I'd say it'd be in like the yellow.
Okay. So it's just pretty baseline. So you get the quote is assigned and now you get to evaluate it. Is that good, great, or needs some help?
Depends on what information given when the quote is brought in.
Okay. So is it a concern around like level of completion, like completeness of that thing, or is it like what is being asked for in the quote?
Yeah, I know personally it's more of like, how much information did my rep give me for me to be able to start this? Or do I need to further investigate with whomever to figure out what they need?
Yeah. That's awesome. So picking a section. And again, I don't know if I've got the language on that completely right or the description of this right. I'm kind of going by what we had. So is that baseline? Is it problematic? Is it super good?
I would say good because it's not, I mean, you're starting it, so.
Mm-hmm. So you'd put it up in the positive, like the super good section, or just kind of the baseline?
I know when I'm doing a project, I start with the section I want to do first.
That's awesome.
It'll get done quicker.
No, that's great. I love that. I start, whoops. You'll have to pardon my typos here too. Start with the section I'm most excited about. That is perfect. So now you visualize the configuration of the space. Is that also kind of up there because you're doing it with the section that you want to the most, or is that like where some challenge lays? All right. So now you pick your extension. Are we still kind of riding the emotional high, or are we dipping back down, or are we really troughing there? Like, how do we feel on that?
I'm a manufacturer and a designer for the manufacturer. So like our extension is the same extension unless we're using like props or accessories.
Okay. So there's it at the very least it's kind of an average experience because it just sort of depends on whether or not you have the number of choices, right? Like maybe this is already kind of dictated for you. So now you're placing products in the scene.
I would typically start, it depends on what kind of quote it is, I guess. Because if it's a larger one, we have like a CAD drawing in there and lay out some walls and doors and stuff first before I start throwing in furniture.
Okay. So there might be another step that kind of precedes this.
Yeah.
And what did you say that step was? How would you refer to that step?
Just like adding the architecture elements.
Where would you peg that? Would that be super positive, middle of the road?
Pretty neutral.
Pretty neutral?
Yeah.
Do you feel the same about placing the products?
It depends. I mean, if the layout's really nice and we have a good solution for them, sure. But if they want something that maybe we could do better, but they don't want, I'm
Yeah.
not gonna, it could be in between.
I think it also depends on if the extension like works, right? There are
Yeah.
a lot of bugs in that. While you're placing the products in the scene, it can be problematic.
Stability of the extension, we'll call it. So now we get into peer review. How do we feel about peer review? Feel awesome about peer review? Way up there. Kind of neutral.
I don't know. It's neutral.
Neutral?
Yeah.
So when you demo for the customer, how are you feeling? Where is that?
That's not something I would be doing. That's something like a rep would be doing.
Can anybody speak to demoing for the customer and how you feel about it? Is that a place where generally the experience is very positive? Like, you know, you're getting a lot of great feedback and there's a lot of good push and pull and conversation. Is it neutral, or is it particularly painful in any specific ways?
I'll just speak up as a non-designer to
Yeah.
participate here and say, man,
Totally.
like for me, the kind of personal interaction during this stage, like I feel invigorated, you know what I mean? So I'm going in the green there. This is an opportunity to be efficient in the feedback that you're receiving and to really wow them with what you're doing. So maybe I'm a positive person by nature, but that's all in the green for me.
No, that's awesome. So then you get that, you demo for the customer, everything is great. They place, an order is placed. Where does that fall for folks?
Are we saying we only have one revision? Because we all know that's not true.
We'll think ideal.
Okay.
But we will definitely note that. How does the revision process strike you? Is that a positive?
The revision?
Right.
Well, the only time it's positive is if they're adding more product.
Okay.
They love our product so much they just need more of it.
So we will denote that as the revision process. So they place the order. So then the order gets audited. Is there anybody that can speak to that, or is that a relatively automatic thing? Is that, is there any emotion that's tied to that?
I think that's pretty neutral. I know when like a PO comes in, we just have to make sure that like all the information needed is on there so that order entry can enter it without having issues, and it's like a seamless process.
If it's coming through a well-written spec tool, the order audit should be easy breezy.
Cool. So might be a little bit more plus-ish if it's coming through a good spec tool. So then the order gets fulfilled. Anybody, is that like the time that you're, popping open celebratory bottles of non-alcoholic grape juice? Is that something that's just kind of par for the course, or is that something where, you're feeling like, there are so many landmines here? Like, how do we feel about that?
So the order is fulfilled. Is that like it leaves our facility, or it arrives to them, or?
Are there any particular points at either of those interactions that kind of differentiate it? I'd think that it's probably just that whole process. We can shorthand it.
Okay, because I know like once the payment is made, we give our customers like 30 days after installation before they have to pay. So I would assume that like order is fulfilled, order is paid would be like in the green. But maybe not order is fulfilled. Sure, it's probably happy for us, but we want to make sure they're still happy after install and that they don't need anything else.
Yeah. So the last step that we had was installation instructions are passed to installers. Are there any problems that occur there? Or is it pretty, pretty common, or is that sort of like, now I'm super happy because I know that the work is done, or because I know that people are, creating my designs, or where does that one lie for people?
I don't know, I'd say it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because it means it's almost done. And then you can move on to the next one.
So we've spent about like 8-10 minutes on this. We've documented the full experience. We have demonstrated like the places that if we are going to try to reconfigure this experience, we know we don't want to break these positives, or at least we want to make sure that we're keeping up with the ideas of those positives. And we've certainly highlighted some places where some pains can be felt. And also, not only have we isolated those points in the experience, but again, we're identifying the qualities that make those things good or bad, and starting to kind of stub out how we might measure, or what things we might measure, so that we can start to imagine the ways that we can measure whether we are successful in the new version of the thing that we make, or if we are somehow setting ourselves up for failure. So thank you everybody for entertaining my, my couple of calls back to being a school teacher. So I'm going to share my screen, the rest of the presentation, to kind of carry us on out. So we're going to wrap things up, with people and pathways. We focused a lot on learning, and we're going to wrap things up today by talking about the one facet of building that seemed to resonate with the configuration services team. They kind of shared with me that they don't have a lot of use for discussions of contrast ratios and UI libraries, but because they dealt more with the arrangement and movement of potentially massive amounts of information, they really enjoyed this discussion. It's a very light discussion on information architecture. So that's kind of where we'll wrap things up. So one of the biggest concerns that we started to talk about was, how do you organize and structure your information, right? You've got so many things, there are so many decisions, there are so many choices, and people love choices, but they don't love too many choices. So the way that the information in your product is organized should be directly correlated to those goals, right? Like the problem statement that we started out with, but also now that you've built up an understanding of your users, you can start to use their input as a guide for the proper arrangement of your information. And just so we have a kind of a commonly accepted short definition, information architecture is something that we could conduct an entire series of classes on. So I don't want to try to betray its complexity, but for the purposes of just a general understanding, information architecture refers to the organization of your information places and how that promotes the usability of those spaces, as well as your ability to find the information once it has all been organized. You can see there are some organizational schemes. They might look a lot like site maps if you have any sort of history in website development or things like that. But the two things that we can talk about, the two tools that you can use even in the work that you're doing right now if you don't consider yourself to be an information architect. First is a tool to define an information architecture for your product, and it's called card sorting. And there are two different kinds. There's open sorts and closed sorts, but both of them are used to just determine proper hierarchy and categorization for your information. The difference only being that, in both situations, you start out with just a big ton of stuff, all of the things that make up your product. In an open card sort, you turn all of those things over to your users, and you let them start to combine those things, create categories of their own naming for those things, so that you can start to see, well, what is their mental model? What's their understanding of the relationships between these things? And then you can start to use that to organize the information architecture of your product. Closed sorts are largely the same, except for that you give predefined a predefined number of categories, and each of those categories has their own names. And then you ask a user to, take that pile of information and try to figure out which categories that are best suited for that. So that's a little bit more applicable if you have an existing, application or solution. And then the way that you validate that card sort is through a technique called tree testing, which is essentially reverse card sorting. The captures that I've got here are from a tool called TreeJack through a company called Optimal Workshop. It's free up to a certain number of tests. So if you want to get your feet wet on that stuff, it's it's actually kind of fun. So what you do is you can build out these very rough, very simple prototypes of your information architecture, and it manifests kind of in a way that looks like a navigation, like a tree control. And then you establish a set of use cases and tests, scenarios that you can put the users through to sort of say, okay, well, how would you find this thing? And then your participant, your test participant, goes through and they click their path through that tree and they denote when they think they've found the answer. And then you get all of the stuff that's on the bottom, these awesome demonstrations, these infographics around those paths and whether or not they were successful. And the great thing is that no matter what the outcome is of the test, like you get great insight. You either get validation that the card sort was correct and that you did the work great up front. Good job, high fives all around. Or you might see that trends develop towards a different sort of organization. And that's also great because it already is doing a lot of the work and showing you what a more common or a more understandable arrangement for that information architecture may be. I don't have any examples of doing this within the class. We didn't have enough time to get into that. But again, like I would encourage everybody to go over to that website and check it out if it's something that sounds like it could be applicable to your workflows. So now we come to the recap and we get back to those boasts. So hopefully now that we're kind of towards the end, we can see that human-centered design, how it delivers on those promises of this presentation, how it informs the journey, how having an awareness of the people that are taking that journey can give you a sense of how to improve that journey, and how an awareness of all of that, you know, shows you the points where you can pinpoint your attention to really start to deliver not just in one specific space, but across the entirety of those journeys. And I'll leave you with 3 other quick thoughts, and you'll probably hear these across some other presentations from my colleagues, but I think they resonate here too. First, you know, we've spent the whole hour or so talking about studying what people need. Get to the core of what your users need. Build that empathy, build that understanding, because you're going to find that that is a very effective way to de-risk the things that you're doing and to actually make a difference for the people that use the things that you make. And in the middle of all that, studying what people need, you're going to end up finding the right measures and KPIs. And the real challenge here is get those in place early so that you can start measuring the effects of the decisions that you make. And as with everything, again, you're all busy. You've all got tons and tons of stuff to do, and I understand that. Start small. The value that you're going to be able to provide to your customers, to your organization, by making human-centered design, even the smallest facet of the things that you do, is going to reap so many benefits. And taking just the first little step is better than not trying to take a step at all. So with that, thank you everybody again for your participation and for coming to listen to me blabber at you. We've got some time left for Q&A if anybody has anything that they want to follow up on.
While everyone's thinking of their questions that I'm sure they're going to ask in just a minute, a couple things that I'll kind of mention in the interim. We have about 5 minutes left of this session, and then we do have a break for 30 minutes. So feel free to recharge, grab some coffee, grab a snack before heading to your next breakout session. Next session does start at 2:40 in the afternoon, just to make everyone clear of that. If you are collecting continued education units, there are some instructions in the briefcase post explaining on how to do that. You go in and you grab people's initials. You grab the room buddy for the session you attend. Once again, my name is Kevin Johnson, so feel free to use mine if you're tracking for this session. And Austin, I see raising his hand there, so you should be good to unmute. Austin, what's your question?
All right, thanks for the presentation, Derek.
Yeah.
So for most manufacturers who already have their extensions out on the marketplace, what sort of strategies or techniques coming out of what you've shared with us today could be applied to help improve the extensions if those extensions actually need to be improved?
That's a great question. I'm going to jump back to one of my slides here. For us, I think that human-centered design actually lends a great deal of value when there are already products that have been released, because those products are probably pulling back a lot of information and a lot of insights to learn from. And those insights can then further drive you into developing more questions for improving that product, different strategies for it. So in the case that you've already got something out there, I'd still kind of go back to, do you really understand, like, as you evolve your product, do you understand the right way to evolve it for those users? Do you know who your users are and what their needs and what their motivations are? So I still think that a lot of this stuff could be applicable. It just depends on exactly what kind of capacity you have to start to make those changes, or to start to get that process rolling. But even in cases like that, having a sense of your users' personas, having a sense of their workflows, what jobs they're trying to accomplish with your tool, whether your tool actually accomplishes those jobs in the first place. And even, like I said, even something that can be potentially disruptive, like adjusting or augmenting the information architecture of your product, it's still something that can be tested and validated even after release, because what you might find is that people have concerns about whether or not they can find a particular product, or I can't access this thing quickly enough, or I never know where this sort of thing is hidden. Those are great opportunities to kind of dig into that problem space, test out some ideas in a way that doesn't, sort of affect the current version of your product, and then just get as many insights back from that testing as you possibly can. So I hope that answers the question. The short answer would just be all of this can be applicable.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, it does, Derek. Thank you.
I want to remind everyone that the recording of this presentation will be posted after the conference. So there was so much really good content here. And Sarah, I see your hand up. We'll get to one more question here before we sign off. But I wanted to remind everyone that we'll have the ability to review not only the recording of this presentation, but then I think also the presentation itself will be shared with participants after the conference wraps up. So Sarah, what's your question?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you approach doing the personas. We've been trying to come up with some, and we kind of have them, but to like present them to people, they're not very receptive to them.
Yeah, I think it's a common challenge, right? It's not enough to just have the user-centered design, like to want to implement that process, but you've got to get your teammates to buy into it too. Is that kind of the tension that you're experiencing?
Yeah, I think they're like nitpicking about specific items in certain personas, and then they just will only focus on that instead of like the overall big picture.
Right. I think in situations like that, you can build a lot of success off of maybe trying to shift the conversation towards the factual basis that you've been able to derive some of those persona details from. And doing it in a way that isn't, it's not necessarily telling anybody that they're right or they're wrong. It's just, now you've got research, which is relatively difficult to argue with. You've got some empirical backup in the reasons why you want to structure things that way. So often when conversations around particular points come up like that, I've found success in kind of marching backward a step to say, well, we've made this thing from all of this information that we've got. So let's walk through this information and you know, did we ask the right question? You know, and if not, like, this is what's led us to where we're at. And until we hear something that's different, you know, we can keep conducting the stuff. But, you know, at a certain point, I think that most people acknowledge that, you know, you got to start somewhere. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, Derek, thank you so much. We really,
thank you.
Really appreciate the insight here. I find that absolutely fascinating. Everybody, enjoy your break. Like I mentioned, next sessions will begin at 2:40. So thank you so much for attending.
Thanks, everybody.